You join me here at CrimeCon UK with my daughter, B. Summers, who is... Today we're going to talk about some really bizarre and quite horrific kidnapping cases, mainly from America. So yeah, we're going to start, going to go straight right into it, with Jaycee Lee Dugard. Now tell me all about this case from the beginning.
Okay, so I'll just summarise it. So, 1991, Jaycee Lee Dugard was 11 years old, on her way to school, just walking from her house in South Lake Tahoe,
California.
And her family had moved from LA because they wanted to go to a safer place, which is ironic.
Yeah.
And yeah, she was just walking to the bus stop and she was kidnapped by a married couple, Philip and Nancy Garrido, who I'm pretty sure they chloroformed her and shoved her in the back of their car.
Presumably nobody witnessed that.
A neighbour witnessed it, and
right.
he got on his bicycle and tried to chase him down, but it was too late. So that was like a key witness in the case.
So you knew roughly what car it was?
Yeah, but by that point they'd put in the back of the car, drove about 160 miles away to their house. And she was, never to be seen again, or for at least 18 years.
So this is 1991.
1991.
Probably not many CCTV cameras around, if any.
No. Yeah. And she was only 11, and they took her back to their house where they had like an outside shack area just made up of loads of sort of sheds, and it was like tarpaulin. I think I read somewhere it said it was like a music studio kind of vibe conversion. And they shoved her in there, and Philip Garrido raped her and abused her, and the wife was part of it. And it turns out it was kind of I think the plan was they couldn't have children themselves, so they thought, we can impregnate this person and that's how we can have our children.
And so the wife was fully in on it.
Fully in on it, yeah. And in Jaycee Lee Dugard's memoir, A Stolen Life, she talks about how Nancy Garrido was almost like the more evil one, because she just was complicit in all of it. And so he abused her for years. When she was 14.
So just going back to when she's been kidnapped, did that make the news? Was that a big story, or was it like everybody forgot about her straight away?
Yeah, I think at the time it was a big thing. You know, she was missing and her family were doing like news reports, and it was everywhere. Her picture was everywhere. She was all over the news, and she actually put in her book that eventually he gave her a TV and she would watch on the TV the news reports about her being missing. And I think Philip Garrido like really enjoyed her watching that.
Yeah.
So
I got some sick kick out of it.
Yeah, they knew from, because also there was a witness of her literally being kidnapped. So it was big news. Her family tried to find her, obviously for years, but as the years go on, they just assumed she was dead.
Because in America they have those, I don't know if they still do, but they have those missing children printed on milk cartons. It was a big thing, so she was probably all over people's milk cartons.
Yeah, and like she was, literally the posters on the trees and all over the news, and it was everywhere. I don't know how long really you will have that out there. Like, it's with, Madeleine McCann or something, she goes missing. They talk about it for a certain amount of years, but then it's not going to be front page news anymore.
There's always the next case and some other diversion story.
Yeah, so that must have been horrible because her family didn't know if she was alive or what had happened. But she was kept in the backyard, and then a few years in she got pregnant with his baby and had a baby at 14. And then she had another baby at 17.
Did I read something about they made her watch TV programs about pregnancy or something so that she could learn what it was going to be like or something? I
think so, and I think he obviously thought he knew how to handle it. I think they gave her, like, it just sounds, it was probably very unsanitary. And she was in literally a shack when she had to give birth, and I think he did like assist with the births. And yeah, by that point then she's got 2 children by him, so that kind of kept her going, and she has to raise those kids in the backyard, like where they were literally in the shed, and he passed them off as his children with his wife, so Jaycee like wasn't the mum, which must have been traumatizing. And yeah, the kids grew up for years.
So you're gonna have that weird situation where she's been raped, and in that I can't imagine what that's what it's like for a woman, but obviously then you have a bond with your child. You're gonna love your child even though the father is a rapist, and all sort of conflicting emotions. And this is a teenage girl who's
and also the kids, the 2 daughters that she had, they would call him dad. Like that was dad, and it so it's really, there's so many layers to it.
Yeah, it's like the film Room. You've seen that, where I mean, I guess that may be based on a lot of these cases. That bizarre situation.
Yeah, so
the years went by, and she's had 2 children. And exactly how many years?
And I think then at that
by?
point she realised she couldn't escape. Like, you just accept that, like, that's your life. And it wasn't like she accepted it. She's made like since she's escaped, she has said on record that she doesn't like it when people say, "Oh, did you have that syndrome,
Stockholm
syndrome, where you didn't want to leave?" And all that. She's like, "No, I just knew that I couldn't, and I had 2 daughters. I'm not going to leave my daughters."
Yeah, right.
So I think he gave her a job. He let her have access to a computer, and she was like doing work for him, and she kind of just got used to it. It was just normal.
Did I not read that he actually gave her a phone and gave her an email address for his work?
I think she was like making outgoing calls and things, but I guess
she was obviously too scared to notify anyone.
He would threaten, violence if she would try and escape. So she just never really did. And yeah, years went by. So from when she got kidnapped, it was literally 18 years until she escaped. But he was a convicted rapist and was a sex offender, and so he was on probation.
This is the bizarre thing. I heard that I read that he was actually convicted of a sex offence and jailed for something like, should have been 50 years, 50. But he actually came out only after 11 years, and then he should have been on parole, and the parole officer should have been checking up in him.
Yeah, so he did have a parole officer who was making like regular visits to the house, but he never went in the garden, so he just didn't know any of this was going on. So it couldn't have been very thorough, in my opinion. And that was how it got discovered eventually. He had like a parole meeting, and by this point he's being quite bold, and he's bringing his 2 daughters out in public with him, and he's just palming them off as, they're just relatives, they're just distant family members. And this sort of made the parole officer a bit suspicious, because he was like, you don't have any kids, like, what's going on here? And then he actually brought his wife Jaycee and the 2 kids to a parole meeting, and it just raised loads of suspicions. And they asked Jaycee, "What's going on? What's your name?" And they gave her the name Alyssa. So she said, "Oh, my name's Alyssa," and she was just complying with what he wanted. And then eventually,
before we get into that, I don't know, this is the end of the story kind of thing. I wanted to go into a bit of detail about his weird religious beliefs, or he had some sort of ideology that, completely wacko, but he kept, I think that was part of the reason why he sort of came forward when he was trying to go to some university or some FBI office, I think, and try to tell them, this is I've cured the world or something, and he had something about sound, he'd cured sound or something.
Yeah, he was just...
Not cured sound, he'd found a way of managing sound. Absolute nonsense.
Yeah, from what she says in her book, he is just very strange, and is it deeply religious, or is he just he has deep belief in something that he had just constructed, and it was all nonsense. And she says about that a lot, that he'd always like rant to her about these things, but she was literally a kid, so she was just like, I don't understand what you're saying.
I mean, he wasn't following any organised religion. He just had his own sort of personal religion, didn't he? Sort of bonkers. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then, yes, she gives the name Alyssa, and she says that's who she is because she's too scared, you know.
Yeah, and then I think he knows that like it's all going to come out, so he just admits it
Oh, right.
to the parole officer, and then obviously he's arrested and Nancy is arrested, and they realise that Jaycee is this girl that was taken 18 years ago, and she's free. They ring her mum, who's probably like, can you
she must
imagine
have
that
been blown
call
away,
of like,
yeah.
oh my goodness, she's alive.
She's alive, and you're a grandmother.
Yeah, and then she got like returned to her mum in that South Lake Tahoe.
Do we know much detail about how she coped with being back at home and all that sort of
Yeah, so she
normalisation?
did like an interview with Diane Sawyer, I think it was, like maybe a year or two later, where she like talks about.
She's the interviewee that in the whatever that year was that you would go and speak to.
Yeah, and she like talks about her experience being free, and then she wrote a book, A Stolen Life, which came out like 2 years later, I think, where she talks about it all, and I think she like integrated back with normal life. She had a lot of support. They gave her like lots of therapists and stuff, and she also was quite comfortable because the state of California compensated her because of the poor work of the parole officer.
Yeah, how do you work out a figure for how much you're going to compensate for, like you say, a stolen life? Was it 18 years? Or?
Yeah, 18 years. They never figured out what was going on, and that was like neglect, really. She was compensated. From what it said was $20 million. So
barely, just over $1 million a year.
Yeah, which is is that worth it for like all those years in captivity and all that trauma?
People might say, oh yeah, I'd take $1 million a year, but I don't think you would. Like the best years of your life, sort of thing. Your teenage years, your young 20s,
Yeah, exactly. And then she's obviously got these two daughters, which she loves, but like they're his children as well. So that's very confusing. So yeah, and then in that interview and in her book, she says about how like she had to learn to drive and like all these experiences she missed when she was 16, 17. She got to do those, and she put something about, I went to New York and I like ordered a pizza, and I like couldn't believe the experience of like ordering a pizza, because everything,
like a child.
Everything was like a novelty to her because she was literally a child, so her life was like frozen at 11.
And he'd done everything for her. Not as if it's no charity, but he'd anything,
just brought her
anything
food
she
every
wanted, clothes
day
and all that would have been.
Yeah, but like she never left that house. So like she was, and then she's 29 when they rescue her, or when she escapes.
Do we know whether she ever had a sort of normal love life or met anyone?
I don't think so. Like she has an Instagram, and she puts a lot on there about she has like a horse riding sanctuary thing. That's what she does for like her therapy.
Yeah, I think I read that she was quite into animals, and that was one of the things when she was in captivity, that she was allowed to have some animals or something. And when she was sort of rescued, they gave her the animals back, sort of thing.
Yeah, and she had like a therapist who kind of gave her therapy like through horses.
Oh, okay.
So like that was how she healed. And when you see like videos of her recently, she's like 40 now, and you've never seen anything about the children. They're not like publicly known, and yeah, she's just living life.
This piece of shit, Garrido and his wife, what happened to them?
So they got arrested and got sentenced, and I think they're in prison for life.
Yeah, right. I think I certainly read that they something like 36 years to life, which in America means they could technically be paroled before they die, but
which is unlikely because I think they were like in their 50s.
Yeah.
So yeah,
they would be very old if ever released.
I just couldn't remember. I knew they were like obviously gone, but I wasn't sure if they were either in prison or if they like killed themselves.
No,
but I don't think they did.
Both.
I think they're both still just in prison.
Yeah.
So yeah, good.
Yeah, well, that is a shocking tale, and the next one we're going to talk about. Now,
we should do it in level of like, they're all different. They're all different experiences, but in level of severity by the number of years.
Okay, you choose the next one.
So the next one would be the Cleveland kidnapping.
Okay, right, yeah.
Which obviously happened in Salt Lake City.
No, Cleveland, Ohio.
No, that's yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. The next one is Salt Lake City.
Elizabeth Smart is Salt Lake City one. Cleveland kidnapping.
We don't need to cut that out. People know that things happen.
But
yeah, we're going to go to
Cleveland
Cleveland
kidnapping
in Ohio, which is a kind of a grimy industrial city. Kind of a working class city, and it's also famous. I can't remember the name of it. There's a famous serial killer recently who operated out there, but. In Cleveland, in what year was it when all this happened?
2002 was when he kidnapped the first girl. So there was a man called Ariel Castro, who was like a local school bus driver, and he had kids, and he was like known in the community as like the bus driver.
Presumably, to get a job like that, he can't have had a criminal record or any sexual,
Yeah, no, and he had like young children, like daughters, and yeah. Up until then, fairly normal guy. And then in 2002, he kidnapped Michelle Knight, who was 21. And
she was 21 at the time. She was
21 at the time. She had a horrible life, and I think she was homeless for some time. She had a kid who was taken away from her, and that day she was on her way to like the like a meeting about custody for him. But
she sounds like somebody who could easily go missing, and nobody's gonna.
She had like no family. Nobody really cared about her.
Very different from Jaycee.
And I don't even know if it really made the news because she was an adult, so people just assumed. I think people just assumed she'd run away. She was upset about her son being taken away. She was homeless, so like she's just gone somewhere. Like no one really looked into it. So he offered her a lift, and he did the same thing for all of them. He'd offered them a lift, get them in his car, and then he'd have some reason to go back to his house, like, there's something I want to show you, or I've got some puppies, do you want to come and have a look at them? And he'd like lure them into the house, and then once they were in the house, he would take them upstairs, lock them away. That's what he did to Michelle Knight.
Yeah, right.
And then she was held in captivity for a year while he was raping her and beating her and chained her to the floor and terrible treatment. And then a year in, obviously he's like, well, that's not enough, I need somebody else. So that's when he goes and kidnaps Amanda Berry. In 2003 he kidnaps her, and
she was known when she did go missing.
So she was 16, and it was like her 17th. He kidnapped her the day before her 17th birthday, but she was 16, and again he like offered her a lift and lured her into the house and did the same to her, locked her in a separate bedroom. But obviously the other Michelle Knight is like hearing this and knows that something's going on. It's like he's kidnapped another girl, and then he does all the same to her, rapes her, abuses her. I think he kind of starts to leave Michelle Knight alone because he's now got a new victim.
And sorry, how old is she?
She was 16. So we had 21, 16, and then a year later, 2004, he kidnaps Gina DeJesus, who was 14. And that worked because she was friends with one of his kids. So she knew him. Oh, that's my friend's dad.
Yeah.
So she trusted him and got in the car. And that was the one where he was like, oh, I've got some puppies. Do you want to see them?
Right. Yeah. So I was going to think that puppy's not going to really work for a 21-year-old, but it might for a 14-year-old.
Yeah, so that's how he like lured her back to the house. And, oh, do you want to come inside and see the puppies? And she did. And then again, he locked the door and shoved her upstairs. And so, then he had all three girls in the house. He
must have terrified them because, that you wouldn't normally sort of scream or shout or whatever, but he must have put enough fear in them that they didn't make a sound, because it was in a kind of residential street, I think.
Yeah, I think he like boarded up the windows and he did everything he could so like nobody could see what was going on.
Right.
But they couldn't have made much noise because, he must have, fear, and he was tying them up and probably covering their mouths and stuff.
But actually, I think if we get to the next point is, I don't know if there's anything else to mention, because I want to get to the moment when they're rescued, which is quite. Do you remember that? He goes out for dinner with his family, and he forgets to lock the door.
Well, so bear in mind he's got kids, and the kids come and visit him like throughout this time, and he just doesn't let them go upstairs, and he'll just tell the girls like, you need to be quiet because I'm having guests or whatever. So that's crazy that they would have visited that house and never known. But Yeah, let's not ignore the fact that they were held captive for 10 years.
Right, okay.
So it was
we
from-
rushed past that.
So
10
it was
10 years span.
2013 they escaped. So for Michelle Knight, that was 11 years.
Wow.
10 years, 9 years. They were in captivity, and that was just abuse, and he'd taken his turn, raping them all and beating them.
Yeah,
and-
none of them got pregnant this
No,
time.
they did. So
Oh, they
Amanda
did,
Berry, he got her pregnant, and she had a daughter. So he must have got her pregnant when she
Oh, I
was
see,
about
she had a daughter.
21. The daughter was 6 when they escaped. So if you fast forward, so she would have been in captivity for like 4 years before that happened. So she got pregnant, and
I mean, that's even that concept of giving birth, it's kind of a thing most people want a midwife around or a nurse or
Yeah.
whatever. Somehow he must have managed that
he
without
got her
any...
like a paddling pool. But it wasn't full. It was like just an empty paddling pool to like make sure there was no mess.
Yeah.
And she was sort of just left to deal with it. And I think he was there, but then like the other girls were also there trying to help her.
God.
And like can you imagine how scared you'd be like giving birth literally like in that setting? But luckily like the girl was fine. She had a daughter, and again that was quite a strange dynamic because it was oh, that's daddy and that's mummy, and it's like kind of this family life.
Yeah.
But there's these other 2 girls that were also there that were like auntie.
I wonder whether he had a long-term plan. How was this going to pan out? Or he was just winging it?
I think also he had a soft spot for Amanda Berry, which was why like that sort of happened. Whereas Michelle Knight, they all wrote mememoirs, but Amanda Berry and Gina DeJesus, they wrote one together.
Didn't one of them,
Michelle
all,
Knight-
all of them, given like they write a new journal every day or something?
I know that Jaycee Lee Dugard did that.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, I think they did. But Michelle Knight, she wrote a book separately. And in her book, she says that he got her pregnant, and he like beat her up and
that's
like
right,
made her lose it. So it was interesting that like, oh, she can't have his baby.
Right.
But Amanda Berry did.
So we had favouritism among them.
Yeah, and he was apparently really horrible to Michelle Knight. Like she was the one he treated the worst. She was like,
Yeah, I mean, listening to podcasts about it, she's the one. I mean, all gone through horrific ordeals, but her whole life before this, and then this, and then just...
Yeah, he'd like beat her the most and like say horrible things about her appearance, and she got treated the worst. And Amanda Berry was like, it was almost like they were a family. It was like a weird dynamic. But yeah, so he had like a front door which he'd bolt every day, and then like, what's it called, in America when you kind of have like the front door and then the other door?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like a veranda?
Yeah, you have like 2 doors.
Yeah.
And he'd always lock it, and he used to test them and like not lock it and see if they'd try and escape. And then like if they did, he'd beat them.
Oh, okay.
So like he was like
sort of Pavlov's dog
traumatizing them, so they would just never escape. And yeah, he'd always lock the door. He used to let them in the garden. They'd be in the garden, but he'd make them wear wigs, so like the neighbours didn't know he was like starting to get a bit bold and have them out in the garden. But yeah, he went out one day.
Yeah, I think he forgot to lock it rather than sort of, you're not tricking them.
He forgot to lock like the main bolted door, but then obviously the second door was locked.
Right.
So Amanda Berry went down, because she's probably the most motivated because she's got a 6-year-old and is like, and maybe she's worried that he's going to start, abusing the 6-year-old. So she runs down the stairs, opens the door, and then when she realizes that other door is locked, she just starts screaming out to the neighbors. And then there's like conflicting stories.
Yeah,
of
I
what
like this
happened.
bit because there's the story. There's apparently later a row between these 2 guys who both say, "No, I rescued her. No, I did the big," And the one guy, well, I think both of them. One of them became a sort of viral hero. His content went viral. His interview, where he sort of famously he said something about, "I knew something was weird because this young white girl was running towards a black guy to hug him, and as if that would normally happen,
Yeah, well, from what I have read, there was a neighbour, but he was Spanish speaking. He couldn't really speak English, so she was screaming, and he was like, "I don't understand you," because he couldn't speak English. Right. And from what I read, he just walked away because he didn't understand what was going on. And then another neighbour is like hearing her scream.
That's Charles Ramsey.
He helps her, like she's basically booting the bottom of the door, and he's booting it from the other side, and they just like crack open the bottom of the door. So she crawls out with her daughter and is like screaming like, "I'm Amanda Berry, like I was kidnapped 10 years ago, like help me." So like the neighbours call the police, and then she goes to another neighbour and she calls the police, and there's like a recorded phone call of her saying, like, I'm Amanda Berry, I've been gone for 10 years, I'm free now, like, come help me.
Right.
So loads of police come to the house, and they're not sure if it's just Amanda Berry, and like, you know, they're trying to wrap their head around this. And then they go in the house, and they go upstairs, and the girls are still sort of like in the rooms, not sure what to do. And then Michelle Knight like runs to the police officer and is like hugging her or him, I can't remember. And is like, oh my God, you've saved me, thank you so much. And so they're like, oh my goodness, what's happening here?
Yeah, who are these people?
This is Michelle Knight. Like, oh wait, she was kidnapped 10 years ago. And then Gina comes out the other room, and can you imagine these police officers? They're like, these are 3 missing cases.
Yeah.
And
Just
they're all
cleaned up all their missing
they're
info.
all in the same house. Oh my goodness, like we thought maybe we would just find one, but we found 2. So yeah, they all get out and they all go to the hospital, because obviously they're all like malnourished and deficient and everything. And Michelle Knight's got quite a lot of injuries, I think, because she's been like beaten.
But I think so. They all wrote like memoirs, and even this Charles Ramsey, the rescuer guy, he wrote a book. He wrote a bizarre book apparently, which is something about Jaycee Lee and hamburgers. Don't ask me. Apparently he got offered free hamburgers from McDonald's for rescuing them for life apparently. But yeah.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, his tiny contribution
Exactly,
to like
yeah.
their became
It became a huge story in America. And then Castro,
So he obviously got arrested, and I think I read that he was given a life sentence, like plus 1,000 years.
Okay, right.
So he was like
Yeah,
never
pretty
ever
sure
ever
he's not
gonna get
coming
out. But then after a month, he hung himself in prison.
Oh, wow.
So that really irritates me, because that's like they endured 10, 11 years of captivity.
And he couldn't endure a few months.
Yeah, you literally like bottled it and hung yourself. Like, if that's the easy way out, like he should have suffered and had to spend like the rest of his life.
That is quite annoying, isn't it? That
Very annoying.
He didn't suffer. He probably suffered for a few minutes when he killed himself, but not enough.
Yeah.
So yeah, moving on. Now this next case, although it was only 9 months, Elizabeth Smart became a huge story as well. Tell us what happened with that one.
So Elizabeth Smart, I think that was all, again, was it in 2003, 2004?
That sounds about right.
But yeah, she was 14, Salt Lake City, and she got kidnapped out of her bed, which I think is like the freakiest part of it. Like, she was in the safest place she can be, in her bed, and she was kidnapped by Brian
David Mitchell.
Yeah, and Wanda.
Wanda Gargi was his girlfriend.
Yeah.
I read. I didn't quite understand this, but Mitchell apparently met Elizabeth's mother in Salt Lake City, and they got talking. They must have got talking about her property and what work she needed doing. He got a job repairing the roof there, so that's how we know where she lived, and probably worked out how to get into the bedroom. So he then comes back, in the middle of the night and grabs her out of the bedroom.
Yeah, so that's just horrific. And they take her to like up a hill to like a campsite where they'd like made camp.
Exactly. They didn't get in a car, and I think they
were literally on her doorstep.
Yeah.
And yeah, she was 14, obviously doesn't know what's going on, and he rapes her and beats her and all the horrible things. And they just do they just stay in this campsite like on and off? I think they do occasional trips into town, but he'll like disguise her. He puts her in like a veil over her head.
I think there was initially a sort of not a manhunt, but sort of the police went searching in the woods, but they never found this campsite, and then they just gave up, and then
Yeah, because she was everywhere. Like, her face was everywhere. She was a missing person, so people were calling the police with like potential sightings and stuff. It was like a very active thing, because it was only she got found 9 months in, so it was still very new everywhere. And then
I mean, again, like the guy in the first case, the Mitchell had a bit of some weird belief in being prophet of God or something, I think. And he dream up some religion that made that she was wearing a veil. Elizabeth was made to wear a veil.
Yeah.
Although that was probably just to disguise her.
Yeah, they were like, again, extremely like what's that word when you're like really out there?
Yeah.
Like radicalized and like just really
erratic and
yeah. So
bonkers.
Yeah, trauma, like,
but malevolently bonkers, just quite horrible people.
Yeah. So that went on for 9 months, and then I think there was a couple of times that she was like sighted, and people would sort of. It's almost like people saw her, and then she'd, oh no, I'm not her, or they wouldn't let her speak, and somebody asked her if she was Elizabeth Smart, and then the woman like pinched her, so that she didn't answer the question, and there were quite a few times when she got found because she was only like in the vicinity of like where she lived, and then she was like walking down the main road when there was a sighting, and like that was literally how she got found. So they were quite like obvious about it, and with them they got arrested, and the woman got 15 years, but she'd already served, obviously by the time they get convicted, she'd already served 7 years. So she'd got credited those 7 years, so she's out of prison now.
Oh, wow.
And then the man, he got 30 years to life. But again, he actually might be out by now.
Now, I think it's interesting, what you mentioned earlier about Jaycee made a comment about she gets confused with people confuse her case with Elizabeth Smart. Yeah,
I think, to be fair, the Elizabeth Smart case is like really well known, so there's sometimes a bit of a crossover where people like confuse Jaycee's story with Elizabeth Smart's story. And I've seen a video of Jaycee Lee Dugard like saying, she had her own experience. I'm not dismissing that, but it's not the same thing. And I can imagine that is quite annoying if your case gets confused with somebody else, because Jaycee had 18 years
and was raped and
had children and stuff. And Elizabeth Smart's one sounds awful as well, but it just wasn't the same thing.
No.
But Elizabeth Smart now is like an activist. She's got husband, 3 kids. She lives a fairly normal life. But I guess when that happens to you at 14, you're not really ever going to get over that.
No. I think we're almost running out of time, but I'm just going to quickly mention one case I'm a bit more familiar with, which is not in America, which is in Belgium.
Okay.
Now, I remember this because I once gave your sister, when she was a teenager, she was staying over and she wanted something to read. I don't have a book. I said, why don't you read this book? And it was a book by Sabine Dardenne, who was the survivor who'd been abducted on her way home from school, I think, when she was about the same age as your sister when I gave her the book. So she was...
Why would you do that?
Why? And it was sort of terrifying. I'm not surprised she didn't have nightmares, but so...
Literally the same level as you writing in my baby book about crimes.
Yeah, so she was abducted by Marc Dutroux, who was I think he was like a handyman, lived in Charleroi, which is a town in Belgium, I think in the French-speaking part of Belgium, and he's a horrendous character. He was convicted of really serious children rape, and only got 3 years for that. So he was paroled after 3 years. Was then living back at home with his wife, and while there he built this bizarre sort of underground chamber. Where he was going to put these children that he abducted. So I can't remember whether it's 4 or 5. I think it was about 7 girls, all sort of teenagers or young teenagers that he abducted. I think this was in the 1990s. I can't remember the exact year, but he abducts them, and then at one point he's sent to prison for stealing cars or something. And his wife, Michelle Martin, she was supposed to feed these children, so she knew about it. She's supposed to feed these captive children, girls, in this sort of dungeon, and she doesn't. I think she's too scared to go down there, and they starve to death. At least two of these girls were starved to death. And then he comes out of prison, and I think he gets rid of the bodies or something, and then eventually he gets found out, and the police, there's a famous sort of video of the police actually stumbling across this dungeon, which is sort of hidden behind a secret door, and Sabine Dardenne was found there alive and rescued. I can't remember how. I think it had been at least the year that she'd been there, But she's got like an amazing survival story. Like,
I wonder if that was made
others.
into a film, because there was a film called like The Girl in the Basement,
Okay, right.
and it was like based on a true story. So
Yeah.
I wonder if that is based
I
on
think
that story.
but also what's the film? What's the Hannibal Lecter film? Where the killer there Lee has a dungeon and keeps women in it. So it's kind of a nightmare concept, I think. But
Yeah.
yes, Dutroux was also caught. I remember he escaped from the courtroom and went missing for a few hours and was thankfully recaptured. And he's done, but unlike Belgium, I don't think, like America, has sort of proper long severe sentences. He's already appealing, trying to get parole, and he's only done 25, maybe 30 years in prison. So yeah, I'd be amazed if he ever gets out. Or what people would do to him if he ever got out. Lynch him, I would have thought. But there was also connections in that case with Belgian politicians and some sort of VIP paedophile ring. So that's a very strange case. But yes, I think we've wrapped it up with these horrendous cases. So we try not to leave you with any nightmares. And
Yes.
thank you for joining us here at CrimeCon.